Welcome to Promote, Profit, Publish. I'm Juliet Clark, your host. And of course, we have another wonderful guest today, but I want all of you with guesting strategies for your podcast to pay particular attention today. But before I introduce our guest, I want to remind you guys to go over to Superbrand Publishing over on YouTube and follow us. You can see all of the videos of the people that you've been listening to if you listen on podcasts, and you can see they really are real guests. I don't make them up, although I do. Well, never mind. No, they're real people. Anyway, and then go over and try out our Promote, Profit, Publish quiz. You can find it at www.promoteprofitpublishquiz.com and find out how your skill set is lining up for your next book and selling your books, products, and services. So today's guest, I actually talk to his wife every week, and I invited her to be on the show again, and she threw me her husband instead. But I'm really happy with that because I've never actually invited Tom to be on the show. Tom Hazzard is an award-winning strategic product design and development expert and a forward-thinking entrepreneur with great sales conversion skills. In addition to co-hosting the Forbes featured fast growth WTFFF 3D printing podcast and the Feed Your Brand podcast, he successfully launched over 250 consumer products, raking in over $2 billion in e-commerce and mass market retailers with his wife and business partner, Tracy. He believes that the goal of any product, service, marketing, or business launch is to make it sell itself. And that is why he often talks about streamlining business processes to keep marketing expenses at a minimum. Tom loves being a podcast host because he gets to meet people from many varied industries and because he gets to broaden his perspective from all of the widely different areas of interest he encounters in works. And isn't that so true about podcasting? Welcome.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
So we're going to talk about guesting today. And I think I told you earlier that the reason I wanted to talk about it is I'm getting so many cold requests via email to be on my podcast. And it's so evident that none of them have even ever listened to my show and don't know what it's about. So speak to that, please.
Well, boy, that's very frustrating. We get a lot of those solicitations as well. Sometimes they're from other podcasters directly. Sometimes they're just from somebody who has a new book or program that they're trying to promote. Oftentimes I find they're coming from PR agents, that have been hired to help get somebody publicity. And what you're right, Juliet, that it's pretty easy to tell just by reading the pitch or lack of pitch, sometimes the solicitation, if you will, that they really didn't do a lot of homework. It's really, you can tell because the pitch is all about them and
Yes.
not at all about you, the podcast host. Why should you care? Why is this important to you for your show? And that's really it's shocking to me. So many people think that their pitch is actually going to be successful when they do something like that. It just makes no sense. It's like, okay, you think I'm a podcast host going to be like, oh, thank you so much for pitching yourself to me because I am really hurting for guests. I don't know who I'm going to have next week. No, I mean, it's usually not that way for a lot of podcast hosts, right? And so really what we recommend, and we, any individual entrepreneur, podcaster, you want to raise awareness, get promotion, raise awareness for who you are, what you're doing. Obviously you can pitch yourself, to as many podcast hosts if you want, but we also have a service that does this for people and does it the right way. And I'll tell you, we do a lot of work over several weeks just to get to the point where we're ready to pitch. Mm-hmm. Do you want to just be on any show? Well, I think unfortunately PR agents figure, hey, I can check a box. You've been on this show, you've been on that show, check all these boxes. And they don't really care about the fit. How, number one, how good a show is it? Is it worth being on? And is it a good fit for you? Is it a good fit for the listeners of that show to have you on as a guest? there's so many things to evaluate. So we take weeks to not only research what kind of shows we want to pitch to, but we also want to make sure we're doing our homework, not only on the guests that we're pitching and make sure that we present them in the best possible light, but we do our research on the shows. We'll actually listen to, an episode or two. Because let me ask you something, Juliet. Would you respond well if someone said, we were listening to your show recently where you interviewed Tracy Hazzard, and when you talked about this in particular, that really resonated with us. And we have this other guest that we think might also be a great fit for your show because of this. I mean, you give them a reason and some context. Are you going to pay attention to that?
Absolutely. And that is so funny. I was on Chris Ippolito's show recently, and in his show sign up, it actually says, go listen to one of my episodes and tell me what you loved about it and why you think you'd be a good guest based on that. And he would send you to a particular episode. And I thought, wow, I could do that with some of these people who are just cold. And for me, a lot of people see Promote, Profit, Publish, and they think that I only work with books. So they want me to promote their new book, which may have nothing to do with the show. So yes, I
Right.
love that. I love it a lot.
You've got to speak to it depends on the show, right? You either got to speak to the host and really make it clear that you're just not a number, or a number on a list of shows. Your number, 23 out of 50 that they're pitching to or whatever, but that there's an intentional reason why. And that's why, a lot of people don't do this because it's work, right? I mean, it takes some time and some effort to vet shows, make sure that they're a good fit, figure out why they're a good fit. And if you don't know why, you shouldn't be pitching that show. So it's, and that's why there's some costs associated with it, of either your own time and effort, and if you have more time than money, by all means, do it yourself. That's great. We're all for that. I mean, we talk openly at Podetize and our podcast Feed Your Brand about all of these things and how to do it yourself if that's what you need to do with your present business or financial situation. And we know you're going to remember that we provided you that value, and when you don't have time to do it but you've got a little money you can spend, you're going to come back to us. Our customers value spending a little money to save time and effort on their part, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to try to be cagey about what it takes to do this right, and because that just doesn't help anybody. But yeah, it's shocking to me how many people actually think that I'm going to respond. The same thing happens to me with business solicitations. If you haven't had this experience with it, either pitching yourself to be a guest on a podcast, or if you're a podcast host, and I'll be shocked if you haven't had some of these solicitations come your way that are clearly generic and not very personal. But it's the same thing with business solicitations. I get all these lead generation and marketing companies emailing me every week, and the way that their messaging in their email is worded, you would think that they have like, surveillance monitoring in my office, that they somehow know this is what I need to make my business succeed. It's like, you don't know a darn thing about my business. Why don't you ask a question? Why don't you, or do a little homework and actually communicate something with some context? I mean, that's the whole point here. The great thing about podcast hosts is, to an extent, and obviously there's a range and there are levels, right? Some people have a larger need for self-worth than others, but they've all probably got an ego to an extent, because they're putting themselves out there. They're speaking. They're not shy about giving their opinions, and speaking their truth, their mission, their vision, whatever it is. So you can play to that a little bit. A little ego play goes a long way, and say, oh, you just don't want to be on any show. You want to be on my show. Oh, what? Okay, let me hear more about that. Tell me more about me, sort of thing. People respond to that. And it's not about being disingenuous and just playing to their ego when something's not a fit. I mean, it's not going to make sense if you've got a medically focused podcast and you're, trying to pitch somebody that is talking about, innovations in like a tech software, venture capital market or something. I mean, it's not going to work. So there has to be some relevant angle, but you should be pitching that. When we create a one sheet for our guests that we're pitching, and in case people don't know what that is, it's a marketing document. It's a PDF, usually one page. If you've got somebody that really has so many things that need to be communicated about them, you could do 2 pages front and back type of thing, but usually it's one page where it is marketing the guest and why they are someone a little more, I would say, generically, because this one sheet is not tailored to who you're pitching to necessarily, but it is giving a lot of important background on the guest, a little bit about them, who they are, but more importantly, what's in it for you, the host, and what topics do they speak on a regular basis. What usually will include 5 to 7 different topics that they speak very intelligently on. And even if you wanted to focus on something different, at least you understand a bit more of their background because of it. But here's the other thing we do that's more about what's in it for the host. We give their social reach, their total reach numbers. And that might be, hey, they're a podcast host and they have 10,000 regular, listeners a month. Or even if they only have 1,000 regular listeners a month or 500, maybe they've got 5,000 connections on LinkedIn. Maybe they've got a Twitter following that's over 10,000. You don't know. So we'll find where all those numbers are, those credibility factors, and put them together into a number of their total reach, and let them know that, hey, their appearance on your show is going to be promoted to that entire list. Maybe they have an email list that's, got, 5,000-10,000 people. It doesn't matter what it is. The point is, what's your reach? And so that's a little bit about beyond the subject matter, hopefully being interesting to their listeners of their show. And that should be it should relate somehow or be in alignment in some way. Even if that's a stretch, at least to know that, hey, we don't just want to, suck the value out of you, podcast host, and get exposure to your audience. Now, yeah, truthfully, we do. We're looking to promote. But at the same time, we're going to promote your show to our list. So as long as you really do some homework on the show, present why you're pitching their show, and it needs to be clear that it's not generic. Mm-hmm. And then you're sharing, hey, what's also in it for them. I mean, sometimes people who are promoting a book are willing to give away 100 copies of the book, and they can promote that to their listeners. Of all of you listening, the first 100 that go to this landing page and sign up, get a copy of the book or something. I mean, there's, and I'm not saying everybody has to do that. I'm not saying you have to pay to get placed. That's not really the point. But what value are you going to provide their audience? That's another angle, right? What's in it for them?
Yeah, that is so true. So I'm going to give you an example, not what to do. Last weekend, I reached out to somebody on LinkedIn, and I'm sitting there Sunday out golfing, and here comes this calendar link. Somebody booked on my calendar. So reached out to him on email and on LinkedIn, why did you book on my calendar? To be on your podcast. And, they actually went and looked on my website, but I'm an invite only podcast. So for me, I reached back out and I said, well, we always have a pre-interview to make sure that you're good. And they were completely insulted by that. So, that kind of pushiness on things like this, so how do you get around that? How do you be assertive, but not aggressive?
Well, that's a good question. And unfortunately, every different person and their personality and their biases, their preconceptions, what they've experienced is always going to play into this. So I don't know that there is an answer that's going to apply to everybody on that, but I think it usually shows a podcaster that's a little naive if they think that, well,
Mm.
just because they're a podcaster and or maybe they're not a podcaster, but just because they have a book, or they think they're a big name in their industry, and you should they're assuming you should want to have them on the show. I mean, I think that's sort of a rookie error, really. If you haven't been on a lot of podcasts, you haven't um, pitch yourself to a lot of them, you're going to find out pretty quickly what works and what doesn't. And I, you know, to just assume that people are going to accept you as a guest just on your word without vetting you at all, or assume that because maybe they do have a podcast, because they have a podcast and they're offering you an interview swap, that you're going to agree to that and accept that with no preconditions or not checking them out. It really is naive, because um, I'll tell you, early on in my podcasting journey, and it was on the WTFFF 3D printing podcast, which is the one we have like 600 episodes we've done of that show now over like 6 years or something. And we've experienced it all. We've had people we've invited on our show that were horrible guests.
Right.
And we've had people pitch themselves to us. And early on, we did not vet people as much because we were looking for guests. We're like, oh, great. You want to be a guest on my show? Great. Let's do that. And then we interview them. And Tracy and I look at each other after and we're like, we can't publish this.
Oh,
I
right.
can't save that interview. And some of it is simply here's why I say sort of it's a naive thing for them to be, I guess, put off in any way that you'd want to have a pre-interview or vet them, or because the first thing we're going to do if you have a show, we're going to go listen to your show. If your show's lousy,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I want to have you on my show, because that's going to reflect on me as the host. We had somebody who asked us to be a guest on their show, and we went and listened to their show. Now, I've never been afraid to be one of the early guests on a brand new show. Some people won't do that. They have criteria. If your show hasn't been out there at least 6 months or a year,
Mm-hmm.
publishing weekly consistently, they won't want to be on your show. And that's okay if they've set up that criteria. Maybe they have so many different shows they're a good fit for, they have to prioritize, and they only want the mature, serious shows. That's okay. I've never been afraid, for the most part, to be an early guest on a show, because I know from my experience, statistically, those first few episodes of a show are going to get the most plays out of any episodes they ever publish.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe people that are listening right now are thinking, well, why would that be? I don't get it. Well, you got to realize podcast listeners are binge listeners for the most part. They'll find your show and try the latest episode. They're going to see, hey, are you still publishing today? And how often are you publishing? Okay, you're publishing weekly. Let me listen to the latest one or two, see if I like it. If they like it, they're going to go back to the beginning, especially the first half dozen episodes. Even if later they skip ahead and they don't binge through all of them, they're going to go listen to the first half a dozen because they want to see what you're all about. What's the intent of the show, and listening to those early episodes can also inform them a little bit of how you've grown today to what you're publishing now, because you're not the same when your first few episodes than you
You're
are today.
not.
But those episodes are going to get the most plays. So if I want to get the most exposure as a guest, I'm never afraid to be an early guest on your show. However, I am going to listen to your, hopefully at least your first episode or two. And so we got this solicitation from someone who on paper looked good. But
Mm-hmm.
when I listened to the show, the audio quality and the production quality of the show was so poor that I did not want to be associated with that. I didn't want to lead others to have a false impression that because, hey, because I'm willing to be a guest on that show is worth listening to. I really felt it was a poorly executed show. And that doesn't happen as much as people whose intent and vision isn't in alignment with mine. It's rare that it's from a technical perspective, but it happens. And it's just like, I'm sorry, I can't be on that show. So we refused. So I'm going to check your show out. I'm going to listen to it. And if you're inviting me to be a guest, or you're wanting to be a guest on my show, doing that solicitation. But honestly, don't you think that people will be much more inclined to say yes if you're giving them a custom invitation, clearly not a cookie cutter email, and they actually are commenting intelligently on something either you said in one of your episodes, or something that another guest said, or something that actually shows that you're not just a number on a list. I mean, your chances of getting a yes are so much better. So, you mentioned what are some of the things not to do? What are some of the don'ts? And I mean, obviously we've talked about some of them. I just say, don't assume anything. I mean, the old cliche, of course they're going to want to have me on the show. Well, if they did any research on me, they'll know that I'm the foremost expert in this, or that I have a huge following in that. You know what? People's lives are busy. You may be a big deal in your niche, but do they know it? You're going to assume they should know it? I don't think you can do that. You've got to make it easy for them to say yes and break down those objections. And if you approach it any other way, where you're just assuming they should know, or if they bother and do it, you're asking them to do work to consider you and get you on a show, that's going to be all right. That gets pushed to the pile of, maybe if I really have some free time and I want to get to this and vetting them, maybe I'll do it, versus one that you've really greased the wheels and made it easy for them to say yes. Not a problem. Now, another thing that you can do, let's say you want to go for somebody really well known, somebody that really you'd think, wow, this is your whale. You want to be a guest on their show. Or maybe you could do the same thing. You want to invite them to be a guest on your show. To me, you've always got to have an angle that convinces them somehow, not only that you're worthy, but that you've how do I don't have a name for this, but I need to come up with one where there's some kind of proof for them, social proof of some kind, that would make them more inclined to say yes. And what I mean by that is, let's say I don't know you, but I know somebody else that knows you. Right. And I talk to that person and I ask a few questions about you. And in having that conversation, I find out something that I didn't know about you that would be useful. Well, even if that person isn't going to endorse you or make a direct referral, which if you can get that, I think that's kind of obvious. You should do that. That's why, I didn't really think I needed to say that one, but someone's not going to make that personal pitch, but you talk to them and say, hey, I was talking with, I'll just use you as an example, Juliet. Let's say somebody in your neck of the woods in Utah that, you don't know them so well, but know enough about them, and we have a conversation. And then I pitch them directly, say, I was talking with Juliet Clark and about your show. And, we thought perhaps, you'd be interested in this, or I thought after talking with her, maybe I don't put words in your mouth, right? I say, I thought after talking with her that you might be interested in this type of an interview on your show. It just, anything that gives them a little context that's grounded, even if it's not a direct referral, but it's something that they can believe is really happened, and it is actually showing that you care, it's related to their show. You don't necessarily have to have a direct somebody making an ask for you.
Mhm.
It just feels more familiar to them, and the more comfortable they are, the more easily they're going to say yes.
Yeah, and we actually had that. Tracy and I did. I reached out to someone to be on my show, and he mentioned that he had just interviewed Mike Michalowicz. And would I like an introduction? Because I was talking about that Tracy and I were working Mike's book. And okay, here's where the social proof comes in, guys. He made the introduction to me. I said, "Oh, Tracy and I are working your book." So he booked my show 3 months out. I introduced him to Tracy, who has a lot of social proof, and he booked hers the following week. And I haven't spoken to Tracy. No, I'm just kidding. To Tracy since. No, but that's the kind of social proof that you're looking for. Is, that guy suggested to me, "Oh, you should talk to Mike." And Mike was a great guest. I wouldn't have reached out to him on my own because he is really well known. But that was one of those instances where it all worked out. Somebody introduced us and said, "I think you guys would be a good fit. You should talk."
And this is a lesson that I think everybody in business for themselves in any way needs to really learn and understand, if you haven't learned it already, or you need to at least learn how it applies in different ways and not just the obvious way. When you go and pitch yourself to be a guest on someone's show, it doesn't matter what you say. It really doesn't. It matters what others in the world say about you or have said about you. That's the social proof. Okay. You could tell me you're the best thing in America all you want. If I haven't heard of you and I don't know who you are, I'm going to approach that with a bit of doubt and skepticism until I see otherwise. So how are you going to convince someone that you're worth more than just a casual glance and then moving over to, the inbox? What is that, little folder in your email inbox that's
spam?
well, spam, or it's just don't have time for it today, but I don't want to trash it either. The reality is I never look at the things in that folder. So if they get in that folder, they're probably pretty much dead
right,
to me
yeah.
at that point anyway. But, still you're like, I don't want to delete it. Maybe there's something there, but I don't see it yet. So anyway, it sort of gets in limbo is what it does. But if I then provide a piece of information that's maybe a quote of somebody who's got a bigger name, a little like testimonial quote even, or something, or what's even better, if you can get a testimonial video, they have these programs where you can include these little video clips in an email. There's a few different services that do something like that, but you have to make it small so it can go in email, or provide a link to it in an email, because sometimes those things don't get through spam filters. But anyway, you just, Tom was such a great interviewee, or such a great guest on my show, and his episode has gotten more attention than most of my other recent episodes. I mean, if you could have something, and it doesn't have to be just that, but I mean, it could be many things. It could be about what you do, about something relevant to your book, whatever, but somebody else saying something about you that makes you look good and makes that guest think, oh, I might be missing out if I don't book this person. You got to give them more, and just don't assume they're going to go do the work, because they're not.
Yeah.
I don't have time. Nobody has time to do the work.
They're not. I do, however, I have to say, I love our friend Scott Carson, what he does. He has a whole page on his site that is devoted to the shows he's been on, and putting their cover and putting their link. And what a great way, if somebody does check you out and go over, there you have it. That might be a link that you include, because they can listen to you being a guest on someone else's show.
Oh, absolutely. You should definitely do that. After you've been a guest on a bunch of shows, you got to show not only that you're giving the host of that show exposure, not only in social media. Yes, I agree, on your website, and anything you can do to demonstrate when you're on a show, you scream it to the world as much as you can,
Mhm.
then they're going to know you're going to do that for them. Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a very good point, Juliet. I can't believe we haven't covered that yet.
Yeah, so that does bring me to a point. I can always tell as a host who is a user and who is a collaborator, because you guys do my podcast, you put together my materials, we send them out to every single person, and I can tell from the people who share it and share it frequently versus the people who, oh, well, I was a guest and thank you so much, that don't share at all. You have to be willing to share those interviews.
This to me is something I've been becoming a little more aware in the last few weeks since, prior to recording this, how much of a gap there is
Mm,
with some people between what they easily could be doing and should be doing and what they are doing to promote themselves and to promote others. It's really shocking to me. And you brought it up, Juliet. I wasn't really gonna be too self-promoting here, and hopefully I'm still not, because it's not. I'm trying to provide real value here. But the reality is, for every one of our clients that we're producing their podcast for every episode that we produce, there's about 8 or 10 different pieces of material or elements that can
mhm,
be used to promote every episode on social media, or in your email list, or however it is that you want to promote. You've got different graphics, you've got a blog post, you've got quotes from within that blog post, you've usually got a video or a video clip. Some people, it's an optional thing, get audiograms. But here's the point. I've had people who come to us, they've been podcasting for 6 months or a year, and they feel like they're not getting enough value out of it. They're not getting enough exposure. Maybe they don't have as many listeners as they thought it would have. First question I asked them, and this has happened in the last week to 2 different people. Well, I asked them, okay, so tell me about your social media promotion strategy for every episode. Well, first of all, a lot of them say, well, I post prior to the episode coming out a couple times about who's coming out, when it comes out. I'm like, well, first of all, that's the wrong strategy. You're not promoting to a live broadcast that's coming up, and if they don't tune in at that time, they'll miss it. I mean, that's not podcasting, right? That's more
mhm.
like, hey, you're promoting the big game that's going to broadcast on Sunday night, and you want to make sure everybody knows, so they tune in to watch it live. That's a bit of a different thing. With podcasting, promoting ahead of time can actually frustrate people, because
Mm.
you're saying, hey, I've got this great guest, and you have to wait until next Tuesday to get it. Right? When
Right.
podcasters see you promote something, they want to click and get it now.
Yeah.
So promoting something before it's out is really a waste of time. The only exception to that is if you're starting a brand new show and you want to raise awareness, build anticipation that the show is going to launch for the first time on such date. That you could do, but I still would only do it a week before the launch. I would not do it like months out. So you're
Mhm.
just going to frustrate people. You mean I have to put this in my calendar and then remember I got to go back to look then? It's like, no, this is a waste of your promotion efforts. So wait until the episode's published in general. And when it's published, you should be posting every single day. If you're doing a weekly show, okay, every single day after it's out for the week until the next one publishes, and at least promote once a day on what each of the social media platforms that you're really strong in.
Mhm.
I'm not a Twitter guy. I don't really like
Ugh,
Twitter.
I got off Twitter long ago. It's too
Yeah,
toxic.
it's some people really like it. Fine, but if you're a Twitter person, by all means, promote on Twitter. But I'm more, Facebook and LinkedIn, right? And so those two platforms, I'm gonna post. Um, once a day at least. And sometimes I might post twice a day because I've got like 8 or 10 things to do over the course of a week. And I can alternate which one I'm doing on Facebook, which one I'm doing on LinkedIn, or do the same one in both places. Who cares?
Mm-hmm.
But promote something about the episode every day for a week. Because if you're not getting enough listenership, I think you need to sort of hold a mirror and look at yourself first and say, am I doing everything I can do? And it's not like you have to be a slave to this, doing it every day. There are tools you can use to schedule all these social, posts. And you can spend a solid hour probably a week planning it out and scheduling it and getting it all done, and then let it go. Or if you have enough budget, do what I do, and you hire someone else to do that for you, because
Right.
I don't have time to do all that. But I'm gonna make sure it gets promoted. And so to me, this is like the easiest thing to evaluate a show. What's your promotion strategy? What are you doing? Are you making enough noise? Are you raising awareness? And so that's just one thing. And the same thing is what that does, you're right, it demonstrates to others who might have you as a guest, if they look at your social feed and they see all these posts about not only all of your guests on your show, are you also promoting about your appearances on other shows? I'm shocked at the gap that exists. And so somebody the other day, they have a staff, they have support, they have all these materials, and they're making one post for each episode once a week on one social platform. And it wasn't their strongest social platform either. It's like, all right, we gotta rewrite this plan. And so like I said, sort of low hanging fruit. That
it definitely is. And I think the problem is a lot of people don't actually have a content calendar. And that's something I hand mine off to the VA to post the next month at the beginning. So September's, my girl is putting October's. And every week I have an old episode on Monday, my new episode on Tuesday, and then Thursday, and I have something, my book in between on Wednesday. But Thursday and Friday, I'm promoting old episodes of somebody else's podcast that I've been on. So I'm always rotating that in. So I have something posted every day that helps everyone, including,
And here's another thing that you can and probably should do, especially if we're doing this guest program with a lot of people, and usually they have something they need to promote. Like I've got one I talked to Friday, which I guess nobody knows when we're recording this, but anyway, there's a few days ago, I had one that I was talking to who has a book launching January 1st, and they're planning months ahead. I'm like, wow, that's great. And, they want to be a guest on all these shows. Well, first of all, they're already starting too late to be a guest on 25 shows before, January 1st. They should have started 2 or 3 months ago, because it takes time to do it and do it right. But, we can jump through some hoops and go and do our best. But here's the thing that the big opportunity and potential big miss here is that you're gonna go and you've got this book and you want to promote it, but you've got to go and make it very clear that they're going to get as much exposure from you as you're going to get from them.
Mm-hmm.
And there was another point that has escaped my mind, and I apologize, Juliet. That's so many things running through my head as we talk about these things. I had a bigger, better point.
That's okay. I'm going to throw a point in right here.
Do it.
January 1st is a horrible time to release a book. Ooh. I always recommend that it's either November for the Christmas rush or late February, early March, because people have a stack of books they're reading already.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
That's and I wouldn't know that, because while Tracy and I have a couple of books that we've written that still have not been published. They're
yes, I'm aware of that.
You're aware of that. Yes, I know. But podcast world is different, because in December and January, we see some of the highest listenership because people download a whole bunch of stuff that want to listen to when they're on their holiday break or whatever, you know.
Especially when they want to avoid their family. Let's get that in there.
Sure. Or
holidays.
and in most years when people are traveling a lot too, they want things to listen to, you know, on the plane or in a long car ride or something. Car rides are usually when I binge listen to a ton of podcasts. I always enjoy doing that. So let's see, the book promotion, January 1st, and nope, still not coming back to me. Darn it.
But you're trying to, I think the point is you're trying to get them on shows now. And if people are like me, I'm recording you because I had an opening right now. But typically I've already recorded through December. I've got those all lined up and sitting there. So it's probably the same with what you guys are doing. You're trying to book and people have their plan already.
Yeah. And unless you've got something so compelling and interesting, podcast hosts will change their schedule or break in their schedule, push everything else out a week, or maybe put in a bonus episode. It will happen, but you've really got to have something very timely or controversial or really relevant that's worth it to them to break that schedule. Assuming they will do it for you is another big rookie error. They're probably not going to do it for you.
Right.
They'll do it if it's in their interest or in their listeners' interest. But you're right. That's the problem is you've got podcasters have schedules. Just because it's the timing's right for you doesn't mean it's going to work for them. We have a lot of people like you, Juliet, that are already recorded out into November, December. So the idea that you're going to get new interviews recorded now from in, you know, late September to somehow recorded in October and November in time to publish then in December before a genuine book launch, it's kind of late. I mean, are we willing to try? Yeah, sure. We'll do our darndest and try to make it seem to them, because some people will say, hey, I've got a book launching this date, and that might mean, oh, if I don't publish your episode before then that time or around that time, then I'm gonna miss out on sort of the wave of interest in your book for my show. Sometimes you can convince them of that, but not always.
Right. That's so true. And you guys sent me Mark Victor Hansen, which I mean, he's a big enough name. I moved. But as far as promoting books, you know, I just made space for Malin Svensson, but I'm producing her book and she's Jane Fonda's personal trainer. So you better be a pretty big name to have, you know, to expect people to shift.
Yeah. And you can maybe hope, imply, suggest, beg, maybe that, do you think Jane Fonda might, you know, post about this book?
Right. She did endorse it. So yeah, we got a lot of great endorsement, big sportscasters. Who's on that show with Jane Fonda, the comedian? There's a Frankie and I don't know what it is.
I don't know that one.
She's one of her clients too. So Lily Tomlin, that's who it is. Lily Tomlin. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, she's got a lot of great clients. So, but that's a great example of the kind of person you would be willing to shift for. Right. So just keep that in mind. If you want a podcast, if you're not that kind of guest, chances are you're not going to talk somebody into shifting.
Yeah. I mean, you really have to decide, put yourself in the shoes of this podcast host. And, you know, some of them might be so big that you're not gonna be speaking with the podcast host. There's going to be some other gatekeeper in between you and that host. So you really need to present to them what's in it for them. Why is it gonna be worth their while to have you as a guest? First of all, I mean, that's the number one thing you want to do, is to get on to be accepted as a guest on the show. But then once that happens, if you really have a preferred time period that you want this to be published in, again, what's in it for them to actually do it on your schedule and not theirs. So yeah, it's sometimes the more famous somebody is, the bigger name they are, not only the harder it is to reach them, but the worse they promote it. It's weird. You'd think, hey, a big name, they're gonna promote this. They're gonna have so many people following them that everybody's gonna see it, and then they just are terrible at promoting it, and
Yeah.
they don't do it. Others have employees whose job it is to promote it, and if you make their job easy, then they love you and they're gonna do it, right? It's all, it's got to think about not just your own interests. I guess that's the biggest message that I would say in this. I mean, clearly you want to be a guest on shows. You have a purpose, you have a need. That's great. I respect that and I believe that's true. But if you just focus on your needs, you're not going to achieve the results you'd like to achieve. You got to focus on and think about what are their needs? You know, what's in it for them? How can you help them achieve their goals? And also the stroking the ego thing is really important, and it really just works. And it doesn't have to be that transparent that you're stroking their ego, but just show that you care, you did some homework. There's got to be some context there as to why you're pitching their show. And even if it's a personal story and somehow you can relate it to something they said in their show, I mean, you'd be surprised. There's so many ways to do it, but so tragic when I see people fall short on this, and just, it almost makes me want to go and just do a Facebook Live talking about what not to do sometimes, because it's like this. And not that I want to give the person any exposure, because I won't use their name, I won't give them exposure, but I'll just use them as an example. Maybe that's, I think that maybe, Juliet, what I was thinking about earlier is even to promote, and it was this, when we talked about how to promote each episode, another really good thing you can do, just go on Facebook Live, or if you have the LinkedIn Live thing, if you've been one of the people that's been approved for that, or any of the social platforms, whatever your platform is where you could go and do its quick live video, go on there live for 60 seconds. Doesn't have to be longer. It could be 2 or 3 minutes if you have enough to say, where you can say, you know what, guys, I just published this episode. It's a fantastic interview with Juliet Clark. You got to go check it out, and here's why. And then boom, drop the mic. Don't make it overly long, but in the comment of that post, put a link to where they can go listen to the episode, and that better be on your own website somewhere. I'm just telling you right now. Don't send them out to iTunes or anywhere else.
Right.
You got to make your turf be where they go to get that information. For many reasons we're not going to go into today. That would be like maybe a different episode someday. But seriously, go live. Live stuff is getting pushed to more people that follow you or are connected with you. So if then you do that on a regular basis for not only your own shows, but your appearances on other people's shows. And guess what, folks? You don't just have, when you're doing that, saying, hey, I was on Pat Flynn's podcast. Tracy was on his podcast. Actually, I think it's coming out this week or next, I don't know, real soon. Hey, I was on Pat Flynn's podcast with this great discussion about this. So now, instead of sending people to Pat Flynn's website or to his show on iTunes or whatever, you send them to a link on your website or a landing page on your website that has that information. And maybe it's where all your other guest appearances are, like you were saying, Scott Carson does. People will see, wow, look at all that they're doing to promote other people's shows. Mm-hmm. So when they do a little homework on you, they scroll through your social feed. Wow, look at all, there's a post every week about, or maybe more than once a week about their appearance on other shows. That's again going to show them you're not just a passive guest.
Right.
You're an active guest. And so, yeah, I think that's the thing I was forgetting earlier, Juliet. Thank goodness. I was really upset. I was like, darn it, you're going to have to edit that out of the podcast. It's not good.
I don't edit it. You guys do.
Well, I know, but I mean, it would be an odd cut. And now we could leave it in.
Now we can put it in.
Build some anticipation. Is he going to remember? Is he not? I don't know.
Oh, there you go. So where can we find you if we want to find out more about the guesting strategies that you guys are putting together?
Okay, well, the guesting strategy, you'd want to go to podetize.com, and under the services tab, there is podcast guesting right there. And on that page is a whole thing that talks all about all things we do. It's actually more than just pitching you to these other shows. There's a lot of other things that we need to do sort of as at a foundation level to make that work really well. But then also that we haven't even talked about on the back side of it, when your guest appearances on other shows publish, there's even more than we do to give you, the guest, value from their show, value on your website, value on social media and other places. So it's a significant program. So definitely, yeah, that's where I would check it out, podetize.com. And while we're doing that, before we go, I'm just going to see what the URL is. I probably should have had that ready, but anyway, under the services tab definitely says it. And yeah, that's where you would find out. Now, of course, we also talk about guesting on our podcast, Feed Your Brand, which is at feedyourbrand.co. That's a little odd one because it's not .com, it's .co. And then, of course, Tracy's podcast, I'll throw a shout out for there, the Binge Factor, also talks about a lot of these similar things. So keep that in mind. And it's, yeah, podetize.com/guest-podcast-services. That might be a little too much for people to remember. So anyway, it doesn't matter. Services tab, guest program, it's there.
Very cool. Well, thank you for being on the show. I think this is the most we've ever talked. I talk to your wife every week and you're like in the background.
Or we would talk when we'd see each other at physical events, which of course nobody's having anymore.
I know. That's very true. Well, thank you very much, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.